Is, I have a bit of time in my hands, and I've been thinking about, why is it so hard to start a company? And well, it's actually, that's wrong. Like, it's easy to start a company, but why do so many of them
I
fail?
was gonna say it's easy to start one.
It's actually, that's probably the problem. It's too easy, right? Anybody can start a company, right? But as we all know, it takes a long time to build a great company. And so I've been sort of researching this and looking at the number of failures, and and kind of trying to dig in and asking people, like, why they think this is the case. And as I've been talking to people, I've been saying, why do you think it takes so long to build a great company? And the first thing people say to me is, well, what do you mean by great? You know,
Hmm.
and then you get into some really interesting conversations, because it gets very divided very quickly, which I thought was interesting. So I'd say, well, people say, I think Uber is a great company, and then you start to dig into it and you say, well, they were interesting, and they did something really innovative, but then there's lots of contention around their methods, and how they treat employees. So you get into all these interesting conversations. So I kind of stood back from all that and said, well, actually, what does a great company mean? And let's try and have a conversation around that. And I think I think it's because, as you say, Eugene, it's so easy to do it, but it's really easy to wander into the jungle. It's very hard to hack your way out of it, sort of 5 or 10 years later, right?
I always say it's easy to be a wannapreneur, but it's hard
Wow.
to be an entrepreneur, right? It's and I still remember when I left a big corporate gig, I'd get some calls from people and say, "Hey, I'm going to start this. I'm going to start this. What's your advice?" And my question was, are you starting this because you just want to be cool and start a company because it's so easy to start one,
Yeah.
or do you have a vision? Do you have a passion? Do you want, solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
And again, entrepreneurship is I think is the easy part, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we were chatting over the weekend, and you were saying you were chatting to your girls about, like, what's a great company, and they didn't really think about it that way, or companies weren't important parts of their lives, I suppose. So what's your take on that? Because I think
You
there's
you
something
were
with what.
you were breaking up for me, Marty. I don't
Oh,
know if
sorry. Yeah.
sorry.
So I was saying, we were chatting over the weekend, and you were asking your girls about, like, what they thought a great company was, and I asked my kids, and, like, they don't really have an opinion on it. It's almost like that's not, and I think there's a kind of an interesting kind of generational shift as well around, like, the role of companies.
Yeah, I was trying to be different. I know we were gonna pick a company, and I'm like, well, you know what? All of us are, I won't disclose all of our age groups and demographics, but
Thank you.
we're in a certain age group, and I figured, you know what, I'll bring kind of what my girls who are, 2022 are thinking, how they looking at this. And I found the same kind of thing, that it's, unless there's some really negative press about a company, the
Yeah.
rest doesn't, it's assumed good, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting, right? I mean, I'll be also very sort of transparent here. I don't, unless I really, if I'm investing in a company, or I'm really engaging or thinking about a purchase of, X, I
Yeah.
don't really do the digging either. It's not that I'm
Yeah.
judging companies all day long, right? So it was
Yeah.
kind of an interesting homework, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I've been thinking and talking to people about this and getting very different opinions. But I suppose what kept coming back was, uh, define what you mean by great, and so I just thought I'd invite two of my friends to come along and chat about it and see how that panned out. So let me just, again, what do you say, meticulously unproduced? Uh,
Meticulously unproduced.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. We got fancy slides. I
Do you
love it.
like this? So,
Yeah.
so this is a friend of mine's, a graphic guy, and I asked him to try and put some graphics together for a forja. So forja is Portuguese, and it kind of, I suppose, roughly translates to, like, the idea of a forging something in a, like a like a blacksmith would forge it. So and the idea is that, building a company is a craft. It's not a well understood thing that is like a factory operation. It's a craft, and um, it's not just about capital. It's about the expertise, right? And so I think a lot of the time we talk about
Right.
success in terms of the amount of money that a company has raised. That's success. But I always think about that as like that's the input, not the output. And it's hard to raise money, but also I don't think that's the defining metric of success, right? And I think, as you said, Eugene, we kind of live in our own kind of, I don't know whether startup or scale up is the right word, but we live in that kind of universe, and not everybody does, right? So I think it's a broader thing. So this is some graphics, and this is, I suppose, some of the problems or things thinking about as we're discussing it, right? So why do a lot of these companies fail and startups fail? Um, and even if they succeed, what's their impact beyond making money? There's probably a school of thought which is, well, all that matters is you make money for your shareholders. That's everything, and I'm not sure I subscribe to that. So I think it'll be interesting as we go through our examples. And then I also think there's a bit of a generational shift, whereas I think a lot of my kids and their kind of cohort aren't just saying I want to work for an investment bank or whatever it is. Like I'm not. It's not just about making money for themselves. There's a kind of a broader awareness. I think that maybe I certainly wasn't there when I was kind of starting my career. So I think there's some shifts going on. So I thought it'd be really interesting to just try and take a couple of examples and dig into them and try to think about it along a couple of angles. So like, what does this mean for the customers of the group? What does it mean for the employees? I think a lot of time we talk about it in terms of investing. So, like, what does it mean in terms of returns? And then maybe more broadly, is there a societal impact or is there an environmental impact? So I suppose the conversation we want to have is to try and look at it maybe beyond just what we see every day around the share price or the stock price. And a lot of this information is hard to find, so there'll be a lot of objectivity, but I think the point is just to have a broader conversation, and maybe then we start to invite guests in who've actually built some of these great companies to talk about like what worked and what didn't, and where are the parts that they felt it really worked well, and where are the parts where they felt that if they were doing it again, there'd be areas they'd want to improve. And I think as we all know, just actually trying to get something that's financially sustainable is tough, but then you're thinking about this other part of like, am I really looking after the customers? Am I really looking after employees? Is it having a bigger impact? I mean, it's a complicated puzzle to solve, right? So that was a little bit of the backdrop, as just for
that lens is got a little bit more of a bias, let's say, towards privately held companies, right? When you talked about why do startups fail, companies fail, we're really looking at mostly kind of, then you're talking about privately held or venture backed or something like that, right? It could be bootstrapped also, but just privately held companies. And I think the discussion today, at least from the company that I submitted, also includes a little bit of what does it look like from a publicly held company as well, right? And how do we value those companies? And so it's interesting that there is at least a differentiation, right? If you're talking about privately or publicly held companies, and how do we value them, and what makes them great?
Yeah, and also if we look at the VC industry, right? I had to look it up because I actually wasn't sure. I knew it was, officially was born in 1946, apparently. Again, I don't know the next to the story, so it hasn't even been that long. And I think we've also experienced, Marty, you kind of said, lots of funding, the overvaluations, and this is not unique to where we come from, digital health, just, broader, that's been what, a decade plus, maybe 15, maybe 18 years, right? I think, bootstrapping was a thing prior. Bootstrapping seems to be a thing now, right? If you can't make profit, right, unless it's in hardcore R&D, obviously, right, where some of us also come from, that requires it. So I to your point, Sarah, I love the lens piece, right? Because the difference also is taking something from 0 to 1 and having its values, then taking it from 1 to 10 and having its values, and different type of individuals and people that are required versus a publicly traded company. And again, there's different sizes and efforts in it, but that's, continuous incremental innovation, one would argue. There's no tremendous breakthroughs. Yes, there are examples, I'm sure, right? But so very different lenses for each one. I agree.
Yeah. And the other angle that I looked at when we talked about our companies was, so you have a private and public aspect, but then you have companies that make products, and then companies that create value without making products. So the ones that are not real operators in a supply chain, from that angle, but are doing a different sort of value creation. And that comes with a whole different, once you are taking in the complexities of actually having to operate and deliver on a product, and that can also be a parallel we draw with digital health, right? Those kinds of companies are different than ones that are making, let's say, medical devices, right? Completely different complexity from operations and supply chains. And so the value that's created is, again, a different lens than those that are not, managing product-driven supply chains, let's say.
100%. I want to go back to your point about public versus private. So I'm not sure I understood it. But just to dig in a little bit more about like what you see because I think big companies fail as well, and I think you also see, companies that are not making money that are publicly traded, so like I think the lines are a little bit more blurry than like, maybe traditionally people think. You can see a lot of companies now that are are on the public markets, but yet are still either, whether in biotech companies or car companies or whatever, right? They're still trying to figure out their business model, or they're like, well, we're just going for growth, so we're unprofitable, they probably don't fail as quickly, but sometimes they just run off a cliff, right? And I think
the ratios are different. The failure ratio. I think the failure ratios are different.
Probably,
and you have access to different capital as
well,
right?
True,
Debt capital. So you extending, prolonging.
That's true.
And longevity plays a big role there too, right? You have companies that go on and are publicly traded, but they've maybe been publicly traded for less than a decade, as opposed to companies that have been, over 100 years, in existence, and maybe have gone from privately held to publicly traded, but then are responsible. They have a role in the market for actually potentially scooping up privately traded companies, have made it to a certain inflection point, and then continuing to drive that value or continuing to maintain a reputation, et cetera. So I think publicly traded versus privately traded, but also what is the value generation that they provide? Is it operational or is it other? And what's the longevity of that business? These are all different ways of looking at the companies to kind of understand really how they're playing and what their core business is and what value they're generating in the markets.
100%. Okay, that makes sense. So what was interesting was we all picked like three very different examples. Like, and
by the way, Marty,
usually I was worried that we're going to agree with each other. I'm not sure that we are. So very different.
I had a feeling the company that you actually picked, I had a feeling you would. I don't know why.
Shocker.
It was too obvious. Well, I suppose we'll jump into it. So the company I picked was Guinness. And shocker. As one of their most loyal customers. So for full disclosure, I don't own any of their stock. And what I thought was interesting was that they've been around for a very long time. So they started in 1759, so like 250 years ago. The first 6 barrels of the product made and shipped to the UK. So it didn't just take off like a rocket a consumer, but also because it's just something that's completely adored by people all around the world. So it's not just Irish people who drink Guinness. It's huge in Africa, it's huge in the US, it's huge in the West Indies, and it really is, for a very small country, a very big, impactful brand.
There's also an aspect of creating the community and having the employees closer to the office. So it's also not pure, in my opinion, like we're great because we're providing housing, right? As a matter of fact, I think many of the, especially European companies, always had a, wherever the headquarters, wherever the plant was, just to keep people closer to work, because from that perspective. So, and I don't know the reason one way or the other for Guinness, right? But I just feel like there's also a, I don't know, a company, I'll say selfish reason for doing that as well.
But that's okay, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
if that's
yeah.
the
No,
trade-off, like,
I'm just trying not to be agreeable. That's
yeah,
that's
right.
it.
Those bastards, they
Those,
provided
Yeah,
those
housing.
they
bastards
provided
like,
housing, and
how dare they?
I
How
don't have
dare
to
they
take
offer
a
me a
bus
house?
or a horse for 2-3 hours to get to work. That's crazy. Horse at the time.
I think it was the first company, first beer company that ever hired 2 Oxford scientists actually to make the formula. So that's maybe why it's got some longevity.
Is that right?
Also could be
You
why,
did way better research in my company than I did on my company.
guys, I mean, come on, Google takes 2 seconds. So, so yeah, 2 Oxford scientists. That could be, by the way, why it took 10 years to get the formulation right,
Okay.
which is almost like the same as healthcare development timeline, by the way,
10
right?
years, yeah. Drove this 10 years.
Oh, and your CV is like, which I didn't know actually until I researched you.
That's great, but all they do is make an alcoholic drink, So, and there'd be a lot of people who would have a problem with that, right? So,
Well, they also make a non-alcoholic drink now, so
they do, but and that's a recent development. So if we'd done the podcast 25 years ago, if such a thing was possible, then they wouldn't have had that, right? So it raises the question of like, okay, so great, but at the end of the day, all they're doing is making alcoholic drinks and making money. So is that a great company? Like, can you say that actually I'd sign up for that? That's the mission I want to do, what do you think?
I think in that, relative to the time period it was in, I think that was a pretty good mission. Right?
Okay. Right. Yeah.
But it did more than that, right? Reputation is a huge part too. And look what it did, for the Irish identity, right? It's a big company that Ireland, historically can be proud of, right?
Yeah, okay.
I built community, right? It has supposedly health benefits to be verified.
Well, if you gave blood, they used to give you a half a pint of Guinness afterwards.
Yeah. You can use it also to clean your pans and stuff,
And wasn't, at least I remember, not trying to compare, but from what I remember in Belgium, I heard the beer was because of dirty water, right? So beer just a lot, so I think there's at least from back in the day, a couple of 100 years ago, this was for social good, right? Because you don't want to be drinking dirty water, and therefore you drink beer instead. And that formed communities, back to Sarah's comment. So
okay. All right. So
the genesis was not probably so bad there. Eh?
Which?
Yeah.
The genesis of the company was probably not so bad.
Okay. So does my company get a pass as a great company, or get a vote as a great company?
Is that what we're doing?
Have I convinced you?
I don't know. Do we ask the listeners that are not yet listening to
the imaginary listeners? There's too many of them. It will take too long for them to vote. We just have to make an executive decision here.
I think it gets
I'll give you a pass.
I like it. I like the longevity. Okay. I like the reputation value.
Okay.
I like the community.
All right. So we're all agreed. So that's great. That's great. So my company wins. So now we go to the next one.
Win? No, a pass.
I mean, I'm glad you didn't pick Ryanair.
Yeah, that's next week. I'm gonna pick that one because I just gotta specialize in Irish companies. That's all I know.
That's right.
That's all I'm gonna do.
Secretly, Martin's like running for some public office we don't know about, and using the podcast as a
platform. Jameson.
Oh.
Yeah. Look, I know the one I picked. So I picked Berkshire Hathaway. I know that's like, oh yeah, you can always pick that one. They make all the money, blah, blah, blah. That's the easy one. But there's so many things that I like about the fundamental values of the company.
Well, can we start with a question? Like, what did they do? I couldn't even really figure that out, to be honest.
Well, so interestingly, which I also didn't know until I researched it more, historically, this company, before it was bought out, so it's a typical, the way this company got, everybody associates it with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, but they didn't come into the company until over 100 years, I think, of its existence. And it went through several iterations. It used to just be a textile operating company. So it literally was manufacturing, making things. And then typical to Warren Buffett's style, about 1962, the company was trading at, I think, around $7 and 50 cents a share, something like that. And he thought it was undervalued and that it should actually be at 20. So he started buying it up. Which is basically what he turned the company into, right? Over time, is that buying up publicly, stock or ownership in publicly traded companies that he believes are undervalued. And I think in 1978, Munger came in and then stayed on for another, right, until the end, which was, I think, did he pass away this year or last year? Do you guys remember? I don't
Pretty recently, yeah.
Yeah, it was very recent.
Yeah.
And then in 1985, they liquidated all the textile operations. So, even much later into the business, they held on to that operational textile business as part of this conglomerate that they developed, until 1985, which I find to be quite a long time. And then continued to do this value-based philosophy of buying undervalued companies. And what I love about it is just there's longevity, but there's the steadiness in approach. And so it's not on trend. So whether you look at ESG now, or you try to look at all those different elements, the only two things that Berkshire Hathaway asks its over 80 operating companies to report back is if the financials need to be restated or there's a reputational issue. That's it. Otherwise, it's completely decentralized and basically hands off. And that, I think, is really interesting. So that's different than why I drive the discussion around the public and privately traded, because private investors, you can't just be completely hands off, right? And obviously reporting requirements for publicly traded companies, which would be, accessible, are higher and much more tedious, and the volumes are bigger of what you have to report in publicly traded companies than in privately ones. So in private, you tend to have this mantra of, I'm an investor in a privately traded company and I'm super hands-on. That's what makes you actually interesting. Like, I'm hands-on and I help out and I get in there. Whereas in this case, it's mostly holding largely an insurance portfolio, but a lot of different industries, also food, Marty, Coca-Cola, Apple, I think is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about, we'll put the US food that now.
Go attention to the back,
Yeah, so across a lot of industry sectors, but in essence, this is all publicly held, publicly traded companies that they look for that are being undervalued, and then they buy up the stock.
Yeah.
And that also is different. It kind of gets to, I think, the company that will come to Eugene on your end. But just because you see a company go public in the short term, and maybe after it IPOs, it takes this massive dip, does that mean it's like, game over? Ooh, what happened to you? Or is there a rebound effect in some of these companies? And in Buffett's case, or Charlie Munger's case, I believe they looked for ones where they were sure there was going to be a rebound effect, and that, the general population was just following a trend of, ooh, I'm out, and he looks for opportunities to get in. And so having a real solid methodology about how you assess value in companies and what they're bringing to the table, that leads you to this long-term success. I mean, it's what, an $80 billion market cap, and still based out of Omaha, Nebraska. I love that. It's like, you never moved to New York or San Francisco. You didn't care where the hell, it's like, I can assess you from
You
Omaha.
can come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just look at you from Omaha. And I think the guy stayed in the same house also his whole life. I don't even think
they invest in these companies, but they're hands off. So what actual value are they bringing?
Well, interestingly now, I mean, you wonder from the beginning, did they bring any value other than to the companies themselves? I would probably say no in the very beginning, right? Because if you have such a hands-off approach, what are you doing? But now, after you develop a reputation in the space, right? Now you could say it's even similar to where, like, I could draw the same parallel with other large publicly traded companies that have large operating companies. If you acquire a business in a publicly traded company and you leave it to operate as itself, do you bring any other value other than to say that now that brand kind of gives it a stamp of approval? If you let it continue to operate and do its thing because it was already doing well, and you don't try not to interfere with the business, what you're basically signaling to the market is that this brand name, which people respect and love, gives it like a seal and a stamp. And I would say Berkshire Hathaway does that now, right? If you're a Berkshire Hathaway investor, if they invest in you, suddenly it makes the news. It's like, ooh, look, they just bought all that stock of that company. It's more that they kind of give it a stamp of approval. If you're a company that's devalued and Berkshire picks you up, people might think you're on the rebound, right? So that does a lot in terms of value for your company without having to actually even step into your office.
So a bit like if you're raised from Sequoia, it's got to be a good company.
Yeah.
In the VC world, or if the FDA says your product is good, like it's that stamp of approval, that's transformative. Huh.
So Sarah, I'm curious, what made you pick Berkshire, right? Because obviously, super strong financials, to a certain extent, to your point, they see value way ahead of others, right? In theory, they let the companies operate, but again, a lot of this is financial in nature, which is, again, right? I mean, we started the podcast talking about everybody has their thing, but I'm curious what made you pick it.
The people.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm hanging out with Buffett and Munger every day, and nor just believing the hype. But when you identify with something, it's like, I don't know. In some ways, they remind me. Maybe this is a bit too personal. Like, it reminds me of my father, who, no matter how much money he weighed, he kind of always wore those Docker brown shoes, and sometimes without socks, even when it was cold out. And you're like, what are you doing? But he just didn't care. He was like, yeah, this is fine. What's wrong with what I have on? It's not about, do I have the nicest this? And with Buffett and Munger, it's like that kind of Midwestern type value that I love, that it's like, I'm not moving from Omaha, Nebraska. I don't care what the market says. We have our opinions. We're like two guys that build an, 80 billion market cap company.
Yeah.
So it's the values. So people talk about the team also in private equity and VC all the time, right? And in this case, I would say these guys really were defined this company without question, and continue to. And even when you see that they partnered up with Gates, and then Gates went through all his issues, right, personally, Buffett's not, they don't have that. You never read about this stuff. It's like, that's such a distraction. I never understood how people could overcomplicate their personal lives and run really good business. To me, that's like a massive red flag. If you've got a super complicated personal life, chat, like, I wouldn't invest in you. I wouldn't want to talk to you. I don't want to do business with you. It's like, I don't want to be paying off your ex-partner as part of my, having equity in my company now because you guys got divorced and I got to worry about who you were married to. But forget it. I'm out. And I love that these guys are just, almost like Wonder Bread, white bread stable. That's it. What you see is what you get.
So when we go back to this like list of customers, employees, investors, etc., it's really hard to answer it for like. So there's no doubt.
93, by the way.
93. Whoa.
93. God bless him.
Yeah. Come on. I mean,
that's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
First of all, I hope I get to 93, and then it'd be nice to work, and that's pretty cool. So when we go back and look at our list of like, customers, employers, employees, investors, etc., it's very hard to answer it. Like, there's no doubt that it's an amazing company in terms of longevity and, reputation and performance and all that type of stuff. But to try and assess some of these things is very tricky because they're in multiple industries, multiple companies. In
theory, they're good for investors. I haven't heard much negative about them treating their employees badly. Again, every unit is operating. For customers, I need my Geico insurance or whatever other products, right, they have, or reinsurance products. I did look up that there's some environmental groups that are pushing pretty hard for Berkshire to improve their climate-related statements. Monopolistic practices. I mean, this is how he's driving the profits, right? So good for investors. For society, I guess, question mark, right? I mean, they're employing 400,000 people. You could argue that's good enough. I don't know. I'm trying, Sarah. I'm trying.
No, that's good. I also think, that in the good for society thing, is there something about the fact that you know, seemingly do provide some level of checks and balances on publicly traded companies, right?
Yeah.
That's not just like some other like Standard and Poor's rating or something,
Yeah.
but something that actually says, you know, we dive into this kind of value-based principle, and if you don't meet it, like, we would never invest. I mean, I think it's something for Apple, right? If he thinks Apple's a great company, why does he think it's a great company? It's like a vote of confidence that he's done some diligence to really look under the hood and see how they're operating. Whether it's right or not, you know, can be debated, but you know, it's like its own rating agency in some way, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
So I'm gonna actually just bring it up right here on the screen for the people that can see it. Rivian is the choice of the company that I made, and I think part of it was a little bit of, you know, everybody here is Tesla, right? But not many have heard of Rivian, even though they have, you know, in billion plus, I think, a quarter in revenue, so they're not tiny either. I think as Tesla got originated in something around 2003, this was an MIT guy that started this. I want to say 2000, I forget, 6 or 9, I think 2009 maybe. Originally, billions was invested. But I think the way I looked at it from a lens perspective, that, you know, at least when they went public, the valuation was pretty great. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that did make money on it. And this actually goes back to, is it good for investors? I think it all depends at what stage. You invested.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything, and depending, you know, are you in the first round and the angel round, or, you know, or you one of the investors that put in, you know, post the crash and it's been declining. Now, having said that, there's many companies that, you know, went up in 21 when IPO'd, and then just been, especially in health and healthcare, right? We've seen that quite a bit. The other aspect, again, you know, electric car and accessibility, to be honest, I don't know. I didn't even look at the price. I don't know if it's really
I think it's gone down. It used to be, it used to be super high, but I think they're trying to get it down even sub 50K, maybe.
Yeah. So for, you know, again, in theory, good for our planet, right? Though there are now arguments kind of against electric too. I mean, same with, I think, Marty, you alluded to, I think every company, anything can be judged that way. Last I heard, again, probably not since the stock's been going down, but they've had really great benefits for their employees. You know, really good feedback. I didn't go to what's the website where you can look at the ratings from the employees. Obviously, it solves a customer need. Also, again, you know, yes, there are many choices besides Tesla, but I think in the, let's call it the more luxurious electric market, you know, they were solving a need. And I love the truck looking kind of
that pickup
aspect of it.
It just looks cool.
Yeah.
A pickup truck.
You know, I honestly, I've almost randomly picked it. I was thinking, what's kind of somewhat innovative that's also good for planet, that did make money for investors. Granted, you know, now the stock is not doing that well, to put it bluntly. I think from a community, I'm sure there's a community of owners that are talking about this. So there's an aspect of the community there. What else we hear? So good for customer, good for employees, was good for investors for some of them. In theory, good for environment, and you know, if it's good for environment, it's good for our social good. The planet can live longer.
Right.
So that was my markers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough business, that business in general, right? And I think some of the drop, they say, is related to the overall market drop. So you can't say that necessarily post IPO all the value is lost entirely on something specific. Although I will say I did read one which made me laugh out loud, which was some customer commented like, yeah, on the pickup truck, he drove it off the lot, took it home, and then went to show his family how cool it was that he could do something, which I don't know what pickup trucks do, but something like you push the button and then the bed of the truck does whatever. But apparently, because all this gravel on the drive, got into it, it like didn't work. And so people were talking about using WD-40 and like trying to fix it. And then you think, where was quality control on that one? Like pickup trucks and gravel is kind of like,
Go hand in hand.
you would think they would have test drive that part, you know, like
Uh-huh.
it's not like they're just driving on paved roads in their purpose. But anyway, I mean, this most of what I read is that there is a really good, strong customer following. And the fact that they got this deal with Amazon seems to be their bailout, right?
Yeah.
Amazon now is going
Well,
to take.
Amazon invested, right? Even I think in the original set of investments, they put money into it.
Yeah.
So,
And then they're making the delivery vans for Amazon or something, but now it's more, I guess, related to Amazon's latest transaction on the EV stations, right? On the charging stations. And if that could actually pull them out, that's a really nice story.
yeah.
TBD, though.
Yeah, TBD. I mean, I think the broader kind of EV charging infrastructure is part of the challenge. Broader, not specific to Rivian, right? Just I think, Tesla obviously invested themselves heavily into that infrastructure.
Yeah.
And to your point, they've had some production challenges, but again, what company that does any production, doesn't matter where it's cars, doesn't have some supply chain, especially I think, right? I mean, when COVID hit, there's been quite a lot of just general supply chain issues. And I think they keep popping up just due to macroeconomic and geopolitical crazy shit that goes around the world.
Yeah, that's why I like Berkshire. Get no manufacturing. Got nothing to do with it.
Just print
It's the
money.
company's
Just
problem.
print money.
Apart from the money presses, that's kind of manufacturing.
Yeah, that's true.
Bitcoin.
But the founder's super interesting, right? I mean, from what I could
Rivian?
read, it looks like almost out of like a doctorate in MIT, he set up this company.
Yeah.
I couldn't see that. I think this was his first job, wasn't it?
Eugene Scaringe? RJ Scaringe? I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah. But specifically MIT automotive researcher, right?
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And still has 100% veto rights, which I thought was interesting as well. So even as a public company, it's almost like the Zuckerberg model of like, I'm making the decisions around here. Like, you guys can own some of this thing, but like, let's be clear.
Yeah, I always have 10x votes than anybody else, kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
so,
100% veto. Yeah, so and largest IPO of 2021, and 12th largest in history. Like that's
that one I didn't see. I saw there was the largest for 2021.
I was vaguely
good research there.
Wikipedia, I think, is the name of the site.
Oh, it's funny. I
actually, Wikipedia is not always true. So whatever Marty's saying, that could be completely also false. Yeah,
I heard the same about Google, but
my default, I have it on every single device now. I just go to ChatGPT. I honestly, it's my little sidekick partner here.
Yeah,
I'm pretty much everything.
Just outsource everything to that now.
Outsource, yeah.
So I was like Sarah, I was like vaguely aware of this company, but like didn't really know much about them, and like kind of fascinating when you dig in, because I think the easy thing to do is to say, oh, look at the share price, like that's a really easy, cheap shot, but when you think about what 2009, wherever they started to make those big bets to say, we're going to build something that's, hopefully going to, have a positive impact on the climate, and then to like scale that up to be a kind of a global brand is super impressive.
I really think we can't underestimate the fact they went with the pickup truck though too, as one of the first models. I mean, what a different approach than Tesla, right? Think about the target market for the pickup truck, the electronic pickup truck versus like the space machine, super, self-driving, blah, 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 value proposition of Tesla with a super high price. And these guys trying to come in sub 50K, and one of the first 3 models is a pickup truck. I mean, it's like completely different than.
But think about the market gap, right? And to be fair, they started, I want to say 5 or 6 years later than Tesla, right? So Tesla's been, and that's where they were heading, right? And so I think, it was smart of them to say, look, Tesla is not hitting. I mean, the Cybertruck thing that just came out recently, the ugliest thing that I've ever seen personally, but it's cool. But like that was a gap in the market, right? People wanted electric cool cars. And yes, there's many Priuses. I mean, if you think about electric, like you just think of Prius first. That was the, I don't know, grand car, right? Then
Yeah.
Tesla. And then to your point, you guys never heard of it, but it's a good, like, fill the gap in the market, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not in the EU yet either, just in our defense.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We haven't heard of it.
I
So.
didn't even know that.
Nobody's driving one yet.
Hey,
Or at least as far as I
click
know.
EU.
It's
Hold
not in
on.
the Netherlands. You can't buy one yet. Yeah.
I can click EU. Yeah. Look at that, Deutsch. I can do Belgium.
Maybe it's in Germany.
I think Eugene's convinced
Anyway.
me. I think he's convinced me that it is a good company. There's still a big question mark about, like, will they make money, right? So they're still in that funny space of, like, you know, they lost $1.5 billion last year, so that's a lot of money. But
That's a lot of Benjamins. Yeah.
So we have to give them a bit of a pass on that one to say we think they will, which is a big thing. But in terms of the others, like their impact, their potential impact on the climate, and
my counter argument: they made money for some initial investors, and they probably make money for some day traders.
Okay.
Gotta love those. You gotta love those day traders.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back. That was good fun.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks a million. Ciao.
Cheerio.